Right, well, here we are. I am here at the in-laws and have finally managed to get my setup working. Welcome to Morning Coffee with Matt. Feel free to get yourself a beverage. I would prefer coffee myself, but you are more than welcome to join me with or without a beverage. The topic of today is we're continuing with the theme of dealing with frustrating people. I think today's probably going to be the last day of this particular series because there's a very, very easy way of summing this all up, which I will leave you to wonder what it might be while I'm in the process of checking on the health of this stream. Okay. There are 3 words that I think encompass the theme in its entirety, or at least encompass the rest of what it is that we need to talk about. The 3 words are suffers, fools, gladly. Suffer fools gladly. Now, why is that so important? And why is everything that we need to discuss encompassed in those words? And what is meant exactly by these words? Because people can go and turn them and say, well, this is only something an arrogant person would say. This is something terrible. This is... No. People can, of course, turn things that way, and that would be a very wrong understanding of the situation. That would be a very wrong understanding of the situation. Suffering fools gladly puts the emphasis on the word gladly. Because we all have to suffer fools, right? We need to put up with fools. And of course, we have to then go at some point and discuss what is a fool, but I think that the first word that we need to put our focus on, and we'll come back to it at the end, is gladly. Gladly means that we have a good attitude. Gladly means that no matter what anybody else says or does, we can choose to be glad about how we suffer fools. We have a choice of how we deal with things. And if we deal with them correctly, it doesn't matter what anybody else says or does. We will have done our part, and at least to some extent, we'll be well along our way to getting what we need to get out of the situation and giving what we need to give. So suffer fools gladly. So what would the opposite of gladly be? What would what could conceivably be portrayed as not suffering fools gladly. I would say that resent would be a big one. Suffering fools resentfully would not be the appropriate thing to do. In this context, a fool could both be somebody that is just foolish, just happens to do foolish things and be foolish in ways that tend to be either destructive to us or destructive to others or destructive in general to society. You know, there are many people whose net presence in this world doesn't actually do much of anybody any good. That's a consequence of living on this world. And we can either resent people for going and causing everybody else all these problems. We can go and resent people for going out of their way to make our lives miserable, which I find myself altogether too guilty of at many times. Or we can realize that, hey, these people are here, they're going to be here. It's best that I don't go and do something that I would regret doing later on. There are people that do it, all sorts of things, from the self-destructive, the issue with Brandon Bremer, as I've brought up at some point in the past. I'm not sure if I've done it on this stream. But the issue, the scenario surrounding Brandon Bremer is a very complicated and sad one. Brandon Bremer was a friend of mine. A very, very bright and caring man. There we got that mosquito. And he went to college early. He did all the things that one could conceivably expect an accelerated, profoundly gifted person to do. Or bare minimum, exceptionally gifted. Very high exceptionally gifted to profoundly gifted student. And in many aspects, he was very, very gracious in dealing with other people, but I think that an awful lot of the aspects of life got to him. He had to deal with not being able to be surrounded by people who were able to speak his language, so to speak. He had to deal with being around everyone else and wearing a certain mask in order to fit in. Now, some people find doing this much easier. Some people are able to find certain levels of meaningful interaction to suffice for them and to be stimulating for them and to be good for them. And boy, am I thankful that those people, some of them don't run into having many of the problems that some of the rest of us do. Because one day, Brandon was no more. He had gone and blown his brains out. He had gone and killed himself. And his mom had no clue. His parents had pretty much no clue that he was thinking about doing it. He didn't exhibit any of the signs a suicidal person might exhibit. And clearly it was because he had made up his mind as to what he was going to do. He didn't want anyone to worry about him. He didn't want anybody to turn him back, and he didn't need any validation from other people in order to go kill himself. He went and exited life on his own terms. Now, what I say, yeah, he does have a right to do that, to some extent. At least from a civic perspective, I would say he has a right to do that. But the fact of the matter is, he wound up leaving behind many people that cared for him. He also wound up leaving behind a whole bunch of people that couldn't care less about him as a person, but viewed him as some sort of a show or some sort of a freak, and objectified him. So, what can be done about this situation? I mean, how could things have gone better for Brandon? Well, I think that part of it is nobody had told him, nobody had prepared him for the reality of dealing with people that would objectify him at such a young age for something he had no control over. He had no control over his intellect. He had no control over the circumstances into which he was born. And though he had a bright future, there was so much on his plate that he was having difficulty dealing with it. And I would say that though he, more than almost anyone I've met, went out of his way to suffer fools gladly, or at least to put on the pretense of so doing, the suffering part completely overrode anything else, and it drove him to despair. So I certainly hope that when I'm saying suffer fools gladly, you understand that I'm not just being flippant and saying, oh, this is easy, anyone can do it. I know people that struggle with it today. I do struggle with it today. I struggle with it tremendously due to the fact that it's very, very easy to construe things in such a light as that people have it out for me. Whereas many things are simply personal problems. Many people go out of their way, seemingly, to make life difficult for others, but part of it can be because they're only living inside their head. Part of it can be because they don't see the big picture. Part of it can be because they're tired, they're hungry, they have to go to the bathroom. Part of it can be because there are so many stressors on their plate that they don't have the extra mental energy to consider how their actions or words may impact other people. And if we don't suffer these things that consistently come up gladly, we are going to be the miserable ones. And it doesn't help to want other people to feel the misery that we are feeling. Because wanting other people to be sympathetic, wanting people to understand us, is to some extent an exercise in futility, and is to another extent an exercise in explaining ourselves. It's an exercise in, without necessarily communicating realities, if the realities are too difficult to explain, or if the realities are so far removed from what most people experience as normal as it just looks freakish. One very useful thing is to be able to, for instance, communicate how we're feeling, and to communicate what it is that we need, and to do so in such a way that we give the other person ample opportunity to respond appropriately. Not just ample opportunity to respond, but ample opportunity to do the right thing. And that we would go about generating this whole ample opportunity thing time and time again. In other words, assume goodwill until it has been, without a doubt, proven otherwise. And if there is any doubt, it has been proven otherwise. There are very few people that are so evil that they will go out of their way to sabotage you. They exist, and you can deal with them appropriately, but most people are just so clueless that dealing with them understandingly is the best way. How do you do things gladly? Well, that's another question, isn't it? Because our focus right now is on that word gladly. And I think, especially today, where the focus is so often on how it is that we feel, and how it is that we should feel a particular way, people don't talk about the control that we have over our feelings. In fact, I would say that would be a learned skill, and that is a skill that most people don't learn. How do you control your attitude? Well, I just happen to have whatever attitude I have. Having a fatalistic attitude about our attitude is one of the most destructive things we can do to ourselves, because we then take away from ourselves the power to approach life with whatever attitude that we need to have. Now, some of the elements that make sense to get control of are things such as our own physiology. Getting sleep. Insomnia is one thing that can cause people problems, and the reason I bring up sleep is because right now I'm sleep deprived. And I'm actually sleep deprived because of someone foolishly deciding to keep me up and my suffering them in a wrong way. You can learn from my mistake here. I am currently visiting my in-laws, and somebody had something that was so important that it couldn't wait. So important that it couldn't wait. And with pretty much anybody else, I would have drawn the limit and said, okay, look, I need to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning, which I told. I explicitly stated that. I need to be up at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you're trying to start this conversation with me at 11:40, and this conversation is clearly going to last over an hour. Which I didn't state. I just stated I need to be up at 3 in order to get to streaming at 4. Or that is a very basic piece of information, and I was assuming wrongly that would be enough information for somebody to act in a caring fashion and decide that whatever information needed to be conveyed could wait until morning, could wait until after the stream, or could wait until some other time that doesn't involve impinging upon my sleep schedule, because they don't have to get up until much later than I do. So, apparently, what time it was didn't register to this person. Even though there was a clock on the wall in front of him, and he were catty corner to him, it seemed that he, whatever was on his mind, was more important. And he just went on and on and on, and the problem was I listened. I listened. I listened and 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 I listened. to this person droning on and on about something that he had already gone and told me. Was it 2 days ago, maybe? Or 4 days ago? Where he had gone and written out something that he had verbally told me already, taken pictures of this thing that he had verbally told me already, and was here trying to show me pictures and read this note that he had left. So clearly this subject was important to him. I am not going to deny that at all. But it was pretty patronizing the way he was dealing with it. It's like, okay, number one, this is so important that it can't wait until morning. Number two, you are so stupid that you can't be counted on to understand the basics of what it is that I had told you that you already knew even before I told you. And number three, I like to hear myself talk, because this person that I'm referring to is very much extroverted in many aspects and feels comfortable having words coming out of his mouth. He is built very differently than I am. He has very different dispositions than I do. And what I did, which was completely wrong, was to stew and say, oh, he doesn't care, he doesn't care, he doesn't care. He's just deliberately getting in the way of my doing what I need to do because he doesn't think that it's important enough, or he thinks that it's considerably less important than what he's doing. Well, that's what his actions state, is it not? That whatever it is that's on the plate in front of him is more important. But that's the way he is with everything. If he doesn't sense it, if he doesn't see it, if he doesn't feel it, it's not important. If he doesn't sense it, if he doesn't feel it, if he doesn't see it immediately in front of him, or if he doesn't have some sort of a very, very concrete reality surrounding whatever the point happens to be, it morphs into this abstract, scary thing, and so he prefers to deal in the realm of the concrete. So if he was just going through his phone and seeing this document that he had put together, well, that is now the first thing on his mind. And that means that all these other things have gotten ejected from his mind, and he's not able to prioritize appropriately unless he has the structure there in place to follow. And the structure that he happened to be following was one that was not conducive to getting to bed on time. And so rather than saying, okay, can we take a time out? I really need to get to bed. I don't know if I made this clear, but I really do need to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning in order to be able to prepare for streaming at 4. And I have a lot of stuff I need to get done in the morning afterward. I just let it go, assuming that that piece of information would be enough for him to ascertain that this was a bad idea to talk about something right now. That I would be more than willing to listen to him at some other point, because he's not going to be happy unless he feels listened to. Of course, I'm not going to say that. It's like, yeah, I'll be more than willing to listen to you tomorrow. You know, let's talk about this over lunch. Let's talk about this over something else. I didn't do that. I picked the wrong approach. Of course, I could say the onus is on him to be, cognizant of the thoughts and feelings of others, but I don't think that's necessarily a fair expectation to have of him. I don't think it's that he doesn't care about the thoughts and feelings of others. I think that it's that he doesn't even know where to start. And you need to keep on putting whatever it is that's important to you on the table in front of him, or he will forget. There are different ways of going through life, and that is one that I find to be incredibly difficult because I keep all whatever's going on up here. I rarely take notes of any kind. I mean, the only reason I would take notes is if I have something that's important enough for me to write down. If it's important enough for me to go and say, okay, I need to have this written down for my sake, for the sake of my posterity or whatever, that's when I write it down. But other than that, I wind up keeping many thousands of pieces of information at the ready up here to go back on. And then people are surprised that I remember, okay, if, someone told me a few months ago that they have something going on today, then I'll go and I'll say, hey, how did this go? Oh, you remembered. Yeah, of course I remembered. You told me. Clearly it must have been important enough to you to tell me, or you wouldn't have told me. So I'm going to go out of my way to at least try to remember a good portion of it. And, just doing that differentiates you from everyone else. So that should be some sort of a key that, well, if you can do that, then maybe, and other people go and view it as weird, then maybe it is weird. And maybe you shouldn't expect other people to do the same. So lots of people don't see how what it is that they're saying and are doing fits into the fabric of reality or fits into the fabric of how it affects other people. And so, rather than stewing over the whole thing and thinking this person doesn't get it, this person doesn't get it, this person is hateful, this person doesn't care, just gentle reminders help. And I know that they work because I've tried them, and every time that I do try them, and every time I do consistently implement them, they do work. Now it's difficult for me to do that and be glad, but ultimately I don't really have much of a choice in the matter because I can't go and change the way somebody else is wired. And the only other way of dealing with that would be to make enemies, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And in fact, that is a problem that I find myself running into a lot. That is a big problem that I find myself running into. The problem of expecting that stating the facts and expecting people to remember them and act accordingly will work. It works with a very small subset of people. It works with me. Indeed, it was how my father dealt with me, for the most part. There were very few times that he actually told me to do anything. Get up, sleepyhead. I mean, that's one thing that he told me. If he had to drag me out of bed, and that was a big if. Yeah, for the most part, it was just a question of, okay, educate yourself about whatever it is that matters, and then act accordingly. Do what you gotta do. And then the only rule I had for the majority of my time growing up, or before I was an 18-year-old, is don't be stupid. So, I was expected to think autonomously. I mean, I guess it was congruent with who I was as a person, so it wasn't exactly that unreasonable to expect that out of me. But then, lots of people never get that expectation. Lots of people expect everything to be a committee decision. Lots of people like to hear themselves talk and like to listen to other people talk. I mean, less than they like to hear themselves talk, of course, but that whole back and forth thing is a lot more important to these sorts of people than it would be to an introvert like me. So that basically means that in the situations that I don't deal with that appropriately, I'm the one with the problem. At least in my world, I'm the one with the problem. Because I'm the only person whose actions I can control. And there are better ways of me to deal with a thing. So, however much I may hate spelling things out, A, then B, then C, then D, then E, I need to wake up at 3. Therefore, please tell me this later. And then repeating that as often as necessary while still not losing my cool. While still, maintaining clear boundaries, while still maintaining a polite tone of voice, while still acting like a civil human being. Because I find that the two easy things to do are to retreat or to escalate. And for me, if I really need something in a bad way, I will escalate it, and then people will wonder, where in the world is this guy coming from, and why did he go and disproportionately react to what it is that I said? And sometimes they won't even realize what it is that they did say that set me off. And so my escalating it doesn't get the desired reaction due to the fact that they're not actually cognizant of what it was, because it wasn't spelled out for them clearly enough. So sometimes, of course, understanding somebody else isn't reason to comply with their wishes, but a lot of the time it is. So one of the first things that you can do if you're having trouble with suffering people, or I don't mean that other people are suffering, but I mean that you are suffering them, is to make your expectations clear, to state them unequivocally, to state them respectfully, and to state them repeatedly. Going back to this whole having control over your own attitude, that is not something that people teach. That is not something that is taught almost anywhere. It's completely a learned thing. It's just a question of ultimately conditioning yourself when you feel a particular way to do a particular thing. If you feel a certain way and that feeling is not conducive to you doing what you need to do, you need to have a bag of tricks to get yourself into the frame of mind you need to be. Some of the tricks can be to extricate yourself from a bad situation and say, okay, I need a little bit of time here. Go take a walk. I mean, you can even be in the middle of a board meeting and extricate yourself and say, okay, I'm sorry, I need a few minutes to process. This is getting a little heavy for me. Let me take a little breather. Or you can even just take a breather. That this whole stop and count to 10, take 10 breaths, those kinds of things that you might expect a preschool teacher to teach the children are just as relevant for adults. Because the underlying physiological parameters associated with breathing and so on, those don't change with time. Then there are the long-term habits that you can take control of. There are the sleeping, the hydration, the eating. Eating right, exercising, sleeping properly, remaining hydrated, those are big ones. Routines and habits are also big ones. And I know that may make you seem like a boring person, but ultimately it can actually increase your creativity, and it can increase what you get done in a day, because you've automated so many aspects of your life that you don't have to think about them when you're doing them. Of course, you can have a particular time of your day set aside for optimization of your daily routine, and then you conservatively implement changes. It's better to be able to change one thing, see how it impacts you, change another thing, see how it impacts you, and just keep on going through this cycle. Then also you can go and give yourself time for being creative. And that is difficult for some people to find. They're like, oh, well, these ideas, they just hit me. Well, yeah, they do. And if you carry around a notebook and pencil, you can go and jot a little something about what it is that hits you, if the time isn't good. If you're in the middle of doing something else and an idea hits you, If you can stop, then stop. But if you're in the middle of something important, then just take a little note and return to it later. Don't expect being in front of a screen to help you. If you are in front of a screen all the time, especially if you're going and pumping yourself full of blue light, you're giving yourself artificial stimulus. The more you divide your attention amongst things that don't actually help, the less attention you'll have to devoting to whatever it is that matters. So if you're really trying to be creative, put away everything that's going to stop you from being creative. Your phone, your computer, other people, whatever it is that gets in your way, they should be in another room completely from you. You should preferably be in a naturally lit area with everything that you need in order to get done what you need to get done, which for me is often a pencil and or a pen and a piece of paper, or a pen and a book, or a pen and a whole bunch of books, and then a book to write in, or what have you. So going and setting for yourself appropriate environments for doing what it is that you're going to do also makes a big difference, which is another habit, so to speak. You don't need to completely have everything spick and span and neat and tidy if you prefer having a little bit of chaos, but there still needs to be enough order that you're able to accomplish what you set out to do. Jacob, I'm sorry I didn't get to your comment until now. Mr. Blank says, "Hey Matt, I'm very sorry to hear about your friend. I wonder, did he have much of a peer group or support system apart from me? Did he try to find like-minded people online? That's so valuable." It is very valuable. And to some extent, he did have a support system. To some extent, he did. But, well, I'll detour to answer your question. This is definitely important enough to derail this particular train of thought. And I wrote a little piece about him. There was a Quora question: "What do you think about this child prodigy who committed suicide to donate organs?" And then there's some telegraph.co.uk article. And the Telegraph article is, there are some blatant falsehoods, and there are some things that are just not all that good. So this is a little better. There's a January 16th, 2006 issue of the New Yorker. Letter from Nebraska. And then this is called Prairie Fire, the Life and Death of a Prodigy. I'll give you the link and put it into the chat so that anyone who wants to see this can watch. So, last May, Patty and Martin Bremer promised each other that they would get through the second Sunday of the month without mentioning that it was Mother's Day. Brandon, their son, had committed suicide in March at the age of 14, and Patty was intent on treating the day like any other. Okay. Now, when Brandon killed himself, there were repercussions felt far and wide. Now, I'm going to skip around this article, but there are some things that I need to bring up that are kind of relevant to the topic at hand that aren't in the article. One big part of it is that Brandon did have a support group of sorts of people all over all over the United States and all over the world. There were people that cared about him. At the same time, I don't know if people understood, the people in his support group or in anyone's support group, really. I'm not sure that any of us understood the ramifications. I'm not sure that any of us understood exactly how important this support group is. We may have gotten glimpses here and there and relief here and there, but understanding the importance of our role in the life of another and the importance of other people's the role of other people in our own lives is something that, especially for early to mid teenagers, can at times be explicitly felt, and at other times it can be completely underestimated. So, Brandon had a handful of people. Well, I mean, he got along with practically everybody. But then again, so did I. Right? He was a little older than I was. He went to college at the same age that I did. He was on a similar track of studying similar things to what I was studying. There were so many similarities between us. We were eerily similar in some way, yet I never would have killed myself. There was something different in between Brandon and me, both, I suppose, in the way we look at the world and in terms of the way we interacted with the world, and in terms of our world view. That impacted everything else. But we'll get to what that might have been later. So, means getting up at 5:30 to feed the animals and pitch tumbleweed. The very chores they could not help but be reminded that Brandon used to do. So getting through Mother's Day was difficult for them. Is paragraph 2. Paragraph 3 is talking about how he shot himself in the head with his own .22. Then it goes and talks about, well, he chose when he would wean himself. At 11 months, didn't talk until he was 15 months, but he started off speaking in complete sentences. Potty trained himself at 18 months. Memorized a book of Mother Goose nursery rhymes when he was 2.5. When he was 4, he drove a tractor with a hand throttle and shifter. And when he was 8, he drove the family car home from town by sitting on his dad's lap. 178 IQ. When he was 6 years old, he went to high school through a distance learning course at the University of Nebraska. Finished when he was 10. Went to college when he was 11. Okay, and Patty says we never pushed him. This is his mom. All his motivation came from within, which to some extent is very true. But I think that he picked up on some unspoken expectations and wishes that his parents had. Some unhealthy, unexpected wishes that his parents had. Especially Patty. Brandon went on to take piano lessons through Colorado State University in Fort Collins, 250 miles away. In 2004, he recorded and released a CD, Elements. And around that, if I recall correctly, around that time, he was talking about this artist, Yanni, who he liked very, very much. And the stuff in his CD was, I'd say many people looked at it and thought, oh, well, this is so, impressive. He at such a young age released his music, and maybe I don't really know what's impressive and what's not. I can say, oh man, mosquitoes. I can say that it didn't necessarily impress me because I was composing better things than what he was composing, but I just didn't go and make CDs above it. I didn't go and write this. I didn't go and write to record companies and try to get them to do it. I didn't go to recording studios to make professional quality tracks because, well, I knew I wasn't Bach. I knew I wasn't Beethoven. And I knew that if I wanted to be Bach or Beethoven or somebody like that, Tchaikovsky, Brahms, I'd have to devote myself a lot more to music than I was willing to devote myself. And so I had a more sober view of my accomplishments. Whereas I think that Brandon was told by many people that loved him very much, "Oh, you are so great. Oh, you are so great." And so Brandon got to hear, "Oh, you are so great," so much from so many people that it got to him. And then when he got to the point of not being effortlessly the best at something, that was difficult for him. When he got to the point of having all of this implicit stress of being great, implicit stress of knowing within himself how he stacks up, because he's not stupid. He's not stupid. Knowing that you can go and do all the self-promotion, you can do all these other different things, you can do all this talking, but in the end, if what people are saying about you and your own self-perception don't match up, especially as a teen, that can eat away at you. So that's one thing that can eat away at you. Then there's the communication range, right? He was far out of the communication range of his parents. I mean, not too far, but far enough that it was difficult for him to find meaningful interactions. Now, I wound up being within the communication range of at least one, if not both, of my parents. And I don't think they had any unspoken expectations other than that of character development. Character development was primary importance to my parents, whereas to Brandon's parents, character development was ancillary to them just being impressed by Brandon's abilities. Like as a parent, being not being impressed at all by your children's abilities is a bad thing. Being too impressed is another thing. Both of them give a child an unhealthy view of himself, because regardless of how intelligent he is, a great deal of his self-worth is going to come from what his parents think, at least for a good long while. So if you think of him too highly, then the pressure's going to be on, regardless of whether you're trying to put pressure on. If you don't think of him highly enough, it's, well, what's the use? Then all of the motivation needs to be internal, and for someone who might be a little more passive, it's a little difficult. So having a realistic, emotionally safe environment to grow up in is of crucial importance, and that's a responsibility I think is placed squarely at the foot of parents, and most parents don't do that. It's just that most people aren't affected to the same extent that Brandon might have been. Handsome, gangly, blue eyes, curly auburn hair. Yep. He had grown it long. Like Diani, medieval history, making jewelry, baking cheesecake, lifting weights, playing video games. late night show with Conan O'Brien. Interested in animals, gross out humor, and science experiments he devised at home. Yep. Remodeled the room in a Middle Ages theme. Yeah. His suicide was a mystery to them. It wasn't a mystery to me. It wasn't a mystery to anybody that actually knew him. And it's difficult for his parents to wrap their minds around because they weren't expecting it. And it wound up teaching me a lot. It wound up teaching me a great deal. Like there were a couple instances in my childhood that wound up teaching, or a few, that wound up teaching me more than any other. And this is one of those instances. Because I knew how Brandon was struggling, but I also knew that if I had the exact same struggles that he did, which I had many of them, that I would still be okay. Like, I had this wrong assumption that somehow his home life was as good as mine. His home life was as healthy as mine. But the fact of the matter is, his home life was not as healthy as mine because he was, at bare minimum, not dissuaded from engaging in some weird spiritualistic bullcrap. Stuff that, well, let's just put it this way. There are a few reasons that I don't spend much time with certain people anymore. And the weird spiritualism is one of them. And it mostly has to do with the fact that I only want to surround myself, but in that kind of way, with the people that I wouldn't mind being like. And I would say kind of partially because of Dabrowski's overexcitabilities, and partially because certain parents weren't grounded with a healthy set of worldviews. I know lots of parents that let their children, or even encourage their children in their finding themselves to go and do what it amounted to spiritualist, destructive, cult-like things, to just be the case. And on top of everything else, on top of being on top of not having a solid system of values and a solid plan for character development and a solid structure of immutable principles, whatever that structure may be, I would highly advocate for it to be a Christian structure. But if you go and, for instance, look at how stable societies that are predicated upon Confucianism are, that provides the same general kind of stability. So if stability is the only thing you're looking for, I mean, you do need to have a strong value system, and kind of expecting your children to fill in all the details without any kind of guidance whatsoever. Oh, we'll just go and do that. No. The child's emotional health is too important for you to screw around with this whole self-parenting bullcrap. There are certain elements of self-learning and self-exploration that you can allow and you should encourage. Then there are other aspects that have to do with your kids' mental health that you as a parent need to take full responsibility for until they are in a position of dealing with it themselves. And that is what Patty and Martin didn't do. We didn't want him to feel like he had to hide his gifts, but we were very careful to protect him from doing too much media. When he was 4, he appeared on Real Life, a nationally syndicated show. Meet the next Doogie Howser. The segment depicted him adding 4-digit numbers and then with another child prodigy playing pool and fencing with a plastic sword. Too much media. That's too much media. That's a little bit of something goes a long way. These a little bit here, a little bit there, these things go and change you as a person. These things go and change you. You need to think, what terms are my kids going... What terms? Under what terms will my kids interact with other people? Understand the ramifications. Like, that's something my parents never did. And I'm not coming here from this morally superior point of view, except I am. I'm not coming and saying my parents were better, except I am. I'm not saying that as people they were any better or worse. It's a very, very difficult judgment to make, and I would say that we all have our flaws. But the value system upon which my upbringing was predicated was better than the value system upon which Brandon's upbringing was predicated. So regardless of the nature of the people, the value system matters. Then there's a whole bunch left you can read about. Okay. Even before Brandon was born, Patty had definite ideas about her child. She and Martin knew that this was the one child they would have together. He had a vasectomy as soon as she gave birth, and Patty wanted a boy. She consulted the book How to Choose the Sex of Your Baby, which says that intercourse within 12 hours of ovulation is more likely to result in a male, so we timed it, she recalled. Okay. If that doesn't tell you almost everything you need to know about somebody, I'm not going to go any further with the article. But that, yeah, he had a lot of pressure. He had a great deal of pressure. And of course, he's the one that pulled the trigger. But I'd say that there was enough culpability to go around. And you can point the finger at many places, not just his parents. I mean, I can point the finger at myself because I could have dealt with things differently. I could have voiced to Patty and Martin my concerns. Although I wasn't concerned about him killing myself, because I don't think I realized quite how bad his situation was, although I did realize that it was considerably worse than my own. And then I kind of washed my hands of responsibility for the whole thing, even though I knew that he was in a bad place. I just assumed it would be something he would get over, because it was something I would have gotten over, and I was wrong. I was very, 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 very wrong. So, while I go and gather myself, while I go and put myself back together, I'm going to suggest that we take our normal 8-minute intermission, and I'll be back to continue and finish up our discussion about suffering fools gladly. We've talked a bit about the word gladly, and we'll get back to it later, but now we'll talk about the word suffer and the word fools. Okay, now we're going to intermission. Right, well, we're back. And the subject continues to be suffering fools gladly. And Mr. Blank says that he has been asked by coworkers to help with their code several times per day. And so he's doing what it takes to increase team productivity by helping them. Not personally submitting as much code as he could be, and his supervisor implies that he's dodging some responsibilities. And so it was difficult for Mr. Blank to know what the situation was and why it looked like he wasn't the one getting the most work done, even though he quite likely was the one doing the lion's share of the work. So he was overthinking and feeling upset and hurt by the situation. Yes, I would definitely say that it's very I don't know if reasonable is the word, but it certainly makes sense to be hurt and upset over someone pointing and saying you're shirking your responsibilities when really it's other people that are saying, hey, can you help with this, or hey, can you help with that? And so yeah, make it clear what work you've helped with. Very good idea. So Jacob has decided that he's going to try and make sure that he makes it clear what work he's helped with, while keeping a fine line between underpromoting himself and making it look like he's trying to take credit for other people's work. So how to deal with that? How to deal with that situation where you might be doing more than you're given credit for in the workplace. And on account of the fact that you've been helping other people with their responsibilities, your own responsibilities get underdone, or somehow, if people know how capable you are and they realize that an awful lot of what they might have expected to be going on in your projects isn't getting done, then they can be disappointed in you, especially if they don't know all the details of what's been going on. Now there are multiple things. There are multiple approaches, and certainly in principle, the idea of making sure it's clear what work you've helped with is the most important principle, is the overarching one. But trying to bring this into the framework of suffering fools gladly. In this context, one's boss could be, he's probably the biggest fool, because he's not cognizant of what's going on. In any general circumstance that takes this form, the biggest fool isn't the person who's going and asking for help, because everybody knows that I go and ask Jacob for help if I want to write good code, or if I want good code written because Jacob's going to, or whatever it may be. You ask the nurse that knows what she's doing in order to be able to get something done that's actually important. You ask the doctor that has a clue if you actually want to get a good diagnosis. You ask the programmer who knows what's going on. You ask whoever it is. People know who the competent one. The people that are actually doing the work know who the competent one is. Either that, or they're just so completely full of crap that they're beyond help. But let's just say you're dealing with people that know how competent you are. They will not value your time if you give it away lightly. And so keeping a very small record of, okay, I helped X person with Y project, and Z person with A project, and B person with C project, and so on. Just as a point of reference for you and for your boss and for other people, could conceivably help matters. I would suggest that if you are looking to help people, help them produce better code. I'm assuming that the reason they're not producing code isn't because they can't figure the syntax out. That's literally a question of knowing a language of sorts. But because they can't think in terms of appropriate algorithms to solve problems. They can't go and look at a problem and then immediately see what the solution needs to be or design the solution. It's like, what do I do with all of these pieces in order to put it into a cohesive whole? Now, I might be wrong, but at least from what I've seen, most people that program can't program because most people that program can't think. Please do correct me if I'm wrong here. So that means that many people will not be able to get what needs to be done unless they either have things broken down into smaller, more manageable steps, or they somehow learn to put everything together. So one thing that I might do is talk with my coworkers about algorithms, discuss problem-solving strategies. And I know that ultimately that all that does is give you more cookie-cutter things to choose from. And ultimately that doesn't mean anybody's going to be any more competent in actually solving problems, but I think that going through algorithms and learning what sorts of questions that you can teach them to ask themselves in terms of designing how the program's going to flow through things might require a bit more upfront investment, but hopefully would result in them becoming more independent over time. And secondly, I would say your work comes first. Your work comes first. And the reason I say this is that if you are the one getting your work done and other people aren't getting their work done, then you can go and keep a record of, okay, this is when I was helping these people with these projects. This is what's going on. Then I stopped helping these people with their projects and they floundered. You can go and take this information and say, hey, maybe I'm not getting paid enough. You can go and leverage things, and even if you don't plan on, living ostentatiously, if you don't plan on having a big fancy lifestyle, nevertheless you could get paid commensurate with what it is that you're doing, which means that you could either free up extra time to work on other people's projects, or you could ultimately you'll wind up getting for yourself in the end more autonomy, as well as more people will value your time. The more scarce your time is, the more people will value you. And if you go and tell somebody to do something and you make yourself more scarce, they might respect you more and listen to what you say more so that you don't wind up having to repeat the same thing over and over again. Very, very strange how people react to this whole scarcity thing. But making yourself scarce is, by definition, making yourself valuable. Not only perceived to be valuable, but more valuable. The value of a task will be shown more if you're the one who's doing your work, and then in addition it winds up becoming recognized that you need to go and do other people's work. On that note, I really hate group projects. I really hate group projects. Though there is this lovely bit of information that kind of tells a lot about how things work, is in a group of any given size, the rule generally goes that the square root of the number of people in the group do half of the work. Obviously that doesn't work with one, because one person does I mean, one person will do half the work, but one person will do the other half too. But in a group of two, yeah, that's when we get a little bit, one and two. That doesn't work. It was 1.4 people doing half the work. No, that doesn't work. But three, okay, that's the balance flips. But then when you go to a group of four, two people do half the work. Okay, that's good. And conceivably, maybe even with two people, 1.4 people doing half the work, then 0.58 or so people doing the other half. I mean, that actually seems like that might be the way that it happens in partnerships. But it's easier to have an effect on it that particular way. But if you look at how valuable work is, even if you have one person doing the thinking and one person doing the footwork and one person doing the writing or the typing or what have you, what is actually worth more? Well, the thinking is. The thinking and being able to impart direction. So that might be worth more. But just think, 25, in a group of 25, 5 people out of those 25 will be doing half the work, will be responsible for half the productive output of that group. In a group of 100, 10 people will be responsible for half of that productive output. Just think about that a little bit. And it gets worse. The bigger the group is, it gets worse. Far, far worse because of the way that squares and square roots work. So anyhow, dealing with frustrating people, suffering fools. So suffering in this particular instance would generally mean tolerating people. So tolerating doesn't mean anything like what the postmodern definition of tolerating is, which is agreeing with one's views or practices or something of that nature. You don't need to agree with someone to tolerate them. In fact, tolerance implies difference of opinion or difference of practice. It means living with that person and conducting yourself respectfully toward that person and so on, in spite of the differences. And suffering also implies inevitability of this. So it's not like it is like you go and you just expect, okay, well, it's inevitable. I'm going to be dealing with people. I'm going to be dealing with foolish people. And as long as I live in this world, that's a part of it. Of course, gladly I can have control over my own attitude, but I will be suffering people. It's inevitable. So once you come to peace with the idea that this is just a part of life, which, by the way, I haven't come to peace with, but I do know other people that have and are considerably happier than I am. So I can highly recommend that if you can figure it out, then go for it and do it. I would also say that there are some very, very wise people that have figured many of these elements out, or at least have figured out how to do so in practice. I'll link their profiles here. Oh, you're welcome, Jacob. You're very welcome. these problems are holistic in nature. These problems are very holistic in nature. And unfortunately, you can't really extricate yourself from how it works. You just have to kind of go and look at reality and say, well, this is the way it is. But yeah, keeping a record of what it is that you do, keeping a portfolio of sorts, is very, very good for when it comes time to negotiate. Because if somebody really isn't appreciating you at your own workplace, and you're keeping a record of it, it makes it an awful lot easier to go and jump ship and go somewhere else, where there may be a more healthy environment. But hopefully that would be a last resort. Unless, of course, people are headhunting you and offering you more pay, which is always kind of nice. So yeah, Derek Gould and Omar Bessa are on Quora. They're pretty amazing guys who, at least demonstrably, or at least in their answers and in their communications, are or come across as much more understanding than I am. Of course, I think that for all of us, we struggle with certain feelings and certain things. So, at least that's my perception of the matter. I'd say if I were to try to quantify it, I would say Omar's probably better at it, more well-adjusted than either Derek or I. But Derek is also well up there in terms of being well-adjusted and dealing with other people. He has a great sense of humor. He has a very great sense of humor. Another person who has a very good sense of humor with regard to these sorts of things is this dude here. What he says and does speaks for itself. These guys are amazing. All of them are, and very, very different from each other, but there are still some stark similarities. So, returning to the word suffer. I think that lots of people have different expectations of life than maybe is realistic to have. I mean, certainly one can go and raise one's expectations in the hopes of getting something more, in the hopes of seeing more potential, and in the hopes of pushing oneself further. But then there's also the element of saying, well, okay, this is reasonable for me to expect this out of people. This is reasonable for me to expect this out of life. And this idea that my life always needs to be the scene of some movie, or that I should have these unreasonable expectations is a cultural phenomenon of having, Hollywood divorcing expectations from reality. And so I'd say one of the best things we can do is divorce ourselves from pop culture and the expectations, and they're all implicit, that they would have us have about how life is supposed to go, about how love is supposed to work, etc. In the case of love, for instance, the idea that there's this warm and squishy feeling on the inside upon which all human interaction is supposed to be based within the context of a relationship is utter hogwash. This warm and squishy thing, I mean, that sounds more like loose stools, right? Warm and squishy. No, what does that actually mean? I mean, feelings are transient. And as long as you're going to be other people in your life, you're going to be suffering. I mean, you'd be married to a carrot, for instance, and then you'd be suffering because the person you're married to doesn't have any personality. Or you could be married to somebody who is strong-willed and has a mind of her own, and then you can be suffering because this person is constantly bringing up things that you'd rather not talk about or think of. I mean, no matter what happens, you're going to have a certain amount of a certain kind of suffering, and then you get to pick your poison. Obviously, to a great extent, pick your poison. That's life. You're going to die. Pick your poison. Um, and also pick the joys that get to come along with it, because everything's a trade-off. And make the best decision you can at any given point, but don't have unrealistic expectations of those around you. Expect that love is something that you're going to have to work on. Expect that another person is someone you're going to have to suffer. Expect the closer you get to somebody, the more potential that person has to hurt you. And get this, the pain can be deliberate. In fact, I will say that probably for both of us in our marriage, my wife and me, if one of us is hurt accidentally, if one of us is careless or thoughtless in something we say or do, then the other person can react. It can be a completely reactionary thing with no thought going into it whatsoever. That I want this other person to feel what I'm feeling, and so I'm just going to go and lash out. And that's wrong. But it happens. It's part of the human experience. Being able to be gracious in these sorts of circumstances is a very, very, very rare trait. And being able to do so on a consistent basis is impossible. I do not know of a single person alive that has been able to do that, although I do know people who have come close. My grandmother, meaning my mother's mother, is definitely up there, but she is personally admitted to many of her own faults, so I'm going to take her word on that. So she is at least my prototypical example of a sweet old lady. But even so, there are certain aspects of dealing with her that are suffering. There are aspects of dealing with me that are suffering, both as myself, and seeing my own inadequacies, and probably as you, or as a family member, or as a friend, or as whatever your relationship to me is. You're eventually going to have to suffer through something. I might say something you disagree with. I might say something difficult. I might do something that you disagree with. The list goes on in all the different ways that I can possibly screw up. And the fact of the matter is, if you choose to associate yourself with me, you get the good with the bad. Now, of course, we can constantly be trying to improve ourselves together, but there's always going to be room for improvement. There's this idea that somehow we're good, or this idea that somehow humanity is inherently good, and then somehow environment goes and ruins things. I mean, that's hogwash. It doesn't work that way. Environment doesn't make your kids do annoying things. That's this human nature. Human nature encompasses both the good and the bad. And if you're expecting it to only be good because you've seen so many things that are scripted, well, of course you're going to be jaded when you go and find that life bites you in the butt because your expectations aren't congruent with what's been happening. But because there are certain elements of humanity that you can never change, the only thing you can do is to change your expectations and work with other people the best you can. I'm not going to purport to say that's easy, because that would also be a lie. But, however easy or difficult it is, it's necessary. And it's going to be difficult because people are fools. And sometimes that fool is me, and sometimes that fool is you. In fact, if you're unwilling to suffer fools gladly, the fool is you, because, well, you now know, if you didn't know before, that suffering fools gladly is the thing to do. So then if you refuse to do what it is that you know you should be doing, well, that makes you the fool. If you know that you shouldn't be doing something and you do it anyway, or you know that you shouldn't be doing something, did I say it? If you know you should not be doing something and you do it anyway, or you know that you should be doing something and you don't do it, that makes you a fool. then there can also be the whole thing of just being so completely not cognizant of what's going on. You could just be like unconscious. I don't know. Just like an unconscious zombie walking around life. And those are other kinds of people that we have to suffer. Those are other kinds of people we have to suffer, but that's just a part of life. And the way you suffer them and the way you are glad about them can be predicated upon Hanlon's razor, which is never attribute to malice that which ignorance, or rather stupidity, or another more benign means explains. Now, certainly there are things that can be attributed to malice. Hitler was malicious. Of course, there are other explanations for Hitler's behavior too, which makes him into a more complicated character. But in the end, Stalin was evil, Hitler was evil, Mao was evil, Pol Pot was evil, Chavez was evil. There are all sorts of evil people. But even those evil people do have mitigating or complicating factors that can be understood. Like, I'll bet I could have gone and had dinner with Stalin or something and not gotten, shot in the night afterward. It's a question of making the appropriate connections with people and things and projects and whatever. And the thing is, there is no hard and fast rule as to how to suffer fools gladly, because every fool is different. Every person can suffer a certain amount, though I would say that we all can suffer way more than we give ourselves credit for. I mean, if you look at say, the suffering that people endured under communism, or the suffering that people endured in the Holocaust, or the suffering that people endured until a couple centuries ago, we have a cushy, easy life. And so then when suffering does come, we're unprepared to deal with it, whereas it was just viewed as a part of everyday life way back when. And, in a couple hundred years, maybe people will go and say, oh, well, we had it so hard, and they're going to have it more easily. You don't know. But nevertheless, if you are thankful for the many blessings that we do have, for all the good things, and keep those first and foremost in the mind, and, air's going in and out, blood's going round and round. I have a voice which I can use to speak. I have a brain I can use to think. I have my hands, my eyes, my ears, all of my faculties that I have. Even if I don't have a hand, even if I don't have half a brain, even if I don't have all these things, I still do have what I do have. And that means that however much angst I may have, I have the capacity to learn to deal with it. And I can systematically go about improving my habits. I have the capacity to deal with other people. That is what the cortex exists for. The cortex exists for complex thought, the lion's share of which is simulating human-to-human interactions, planning, thinking, dealing with complicated social circumstances. And yeah, having an overly tuned moral compass can on occasion bite you in the butt, but the fact of the matter is, if you go and you articulate things and you're repetitive and you're willing to go through these basic things that actually aren't all that basic, because they're not easy, but if you're willing to go through them and you constantly do that and you make habits out of them, suffering fools gladly will gradually become easier and easier. I can say it's easier for me now than it was a couple of years ago. It's harder for me now than it was a decade and a half ago. But that's because I changed my own attitude in between a decade and a half ago and a decade ago. And that wasn't the most healthy thing for me to do. See, lots of people, they read my core answers and they think that I have my stuff all together. I don't. Nobody does. I just happen to have an idea of things that might work. An idea of a worldview that makes sense. And this is a work in progress. I am a work in progress. You are a work in progress, but I'm willing to learn and to go through life together with you guys, and with my family, with my friends, and with anybody else that wants to be a part of my life and is willing to submit to the terms of behaving in a mutually respectful way. I'm willing to do that. That's just a fact of life. Now we have about 15 minutes left. And in those 15 minutes, I'm going to suggest that if you guys have anything to say or to add, I'm more than willing to listen. But if you're in the process of dealing with the stream lag and so on, I will I'll just do a little bit of reading and bring up one little point that I think is important. There's a question. The question is a little bit irrelevant to the point that's being made, but it does help. Why do some people get paid thousands of times more than other people who are no less hardworking, talented, and valuable human beings? And the answer, according to Dennis Pratt, is so that when your model of the world does not well predict the world, you need to study where your model is incorrect. If you want to make sure that you are never successful, assume your model has to be correct and that the world is insane. The OP offers a model that compensation is based on hard work, talent, and being a valuable human being. But it doesn't seem to predict the outcomes. So the question is, are the parameters the right ones? Are the parameters the right ones? And that's a very, very important question to think about. Does hard work mean you should be compensated? A young teen digs a hole in the hot sun all day and spends all night filling it in without a break. Okay, that person is a hard worker. Talent. The teen is quite good at balancing a broom on his finger for many hours. The teen is the apple of his mother's eye, valuable, who would sacrifice anything for her child. The teen has hard work, talent, and is a valuable human being, and yet no employer will pay him a red cent. The model disregards the actual business. So how about the variables? Ability to create value for customers. If you can make a dress that sells for $2,000, I'll pay you more than a dress that sells for $200. Ability to add customers. I'm paying affable Brad Pitt a lot more to wait tables than mean fat pimply Bob. Ability to cut costs. Can you reduce my costs by $100 an hour? To this core, there are a lot of enhancements, including hard work, assuring employers, etc. But what matters most is, can you increase revenues or decrease costs? Because that's the bottom line, at least in terms of compensation. So I think that taking a look at what currently constitutes the field of evolutionary biology can give a view into what people value in this world that is less based upon that which is politically correct. Because you can go and wind up, for instance, having a single mom teaching her boy how to be a man by teaching him to be a girlfriend. You teach your boy to act like you would want your girlfriend to act, and then you wonder why in the world, or the boy wonders why in the world he has trouble with women later. Well, it's because somebody said this is the way that you act. Well, biology says otherwise. Biology says that men behaving in a masculine way are going to be the ones that have more opportunities to procreate, and women behaving in a feminine way are going to be the ones that have the greatest opportunity to procreate. There are, I'm not going to say structural differences, but there are differences in the connectome of the human brain of males and females that render this to be so, and these connectomes are vary dependent largely on the amount of testosterone, both in utero and during puberty. So, so looking at the effects that certain hormones have on certain people, looking at the effects, serotonin, for instance, in terms of status, being your internal status, your dopamine, being that which helps you direct your attention towards certain things. If you look and see how these systems are hijacked, or you look and see how these systems are supposed to be used, or how they help people to deal with the world, you can go and act in accordance therewith. And if our view of the world doesn't jive with what the scientific reality says, or with what even reality outside of the realm of scientific proof says, well, then it's our opinion that needs to be changed. But changing opinions is hard. Changing opinions is another thing that leads to a great deal of suffering. People fight wars. People fought and continue to fight wars because they don't want to change their opinions on matters. Because your opinion, to some extent, is as valuable to you, and my opinion is as valuable to me as my sense of self-identity. One trick that some smart people have is that my opinion is that I don't know everything, and therefore I can be taught, I can learn, I can improve. But that is an opinion that I have of myself and of the nature of what exists up here. And other people don't have that. Other people have a static mindset. Other people think, well, I always am going to be what I always am, and I'm never going to be able to learn anything new, and I'm stuck. And that will become a self-fulfilling prophecy for these sorts of people. There's apparently a book about this. I'm not sure what it's called. It's apparently a very popular book. It's let's see if I can search. It's called is it Mindset, the New Psychology of Success, I think. Yes, by Carol S. Dweck. And that, at least to my understanding, is not a bad book, though I haven't read it myself. I've heard many good things about it, and I started reading it, got through the basic thesis, and I tend to agree with it, but at least it doesn't say anything that seems to be particularly different than what it is that I grew up kind of having as an implicit part of my my reality growing up. So anyhow, our opinions are very valuable, and we oftentimes will guard them with our very lives. So now, with that said, we are about ready to be done. So we'll wrap up again with that word, gladly. If you do believe that it's possible to modulate your own opinions, if you do believe that you're not a static human being, but that your brain exists for the purpose of being able to learn and to grow and to adapt and to become better at certain things, then that means that you can fail over and over and over again and eventually stumble upon something that is that is either success or will lead to success, and then you can do it. I'm not going to purport to know every single way that you could potentially improve your attitude. I mean, I don't know every way that I can improve mine, but I can try things, and so can you. And if we understand that failure is going to be a part of this whole thing, and we understand that suffering is going to be a part of it, and we just go and not resign ourselves, but do resign ourselves. Not in the oh well, I'm just gonna suffer and be miserable my whole life kind of way. No, I'm going to suffer, but I'm going to have a good attitude about it, and I'm going to learn how to have an even better attitude about it. Then it becomes easier to deal with the fools. It becomes easier to deal with these people. And I would be very interested if, on, for instance, the Quora Gifted Support Group, if anyone watching this video would like to share their stories of how they've suffered fools gladly, or how they may have screwed up in suffering fools gladly. I mean, I'll go and I'll tell stories of that nature on here if it winds up helping anybody, although none are really coming to mind right now. And also tips and tricks as to different things that you or I or anybody has done in order to have a good attitude. Because those are things that aren't taught as part of school anymore. These are things that parents don't necessarily even teach their children. These are difficult things that unfortunately many of us need to find out for ourselves, and it would behoove us all to help each other in this process of discovery. Alright, well, on that note, I'm going to thank you very much for your participation in the stream. I'm especially going to wish Jacob all the best in dealing with the situation at work. If you want to decompress about it, or if you want me to give feedback about it or anything of that nature, feel free to hit me up. And yeah, I'll look forward to seeing you guys. I'll be here tomorrow at what in the world time would it be? 4 a.m. my time. So 3, 2, 1, 2, 11, 10, 9 p.m. Eastern time, Eastern Daylight Time of the United States. Okay, look forward to seeing you then. All the best. Bye.